This podcast may contain explicit language. Remember, the 5th of November. V for Vendetta is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
No real quippy thing? I thought this would have teed you up, this kind of movie.
Yeah, I thought about it. I don't want to be too predictable.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Tonight, for our 303rd episode, we discuss the anti-fascist graphic novel film V for Vendetta from 2006, celebrating its 20th anniversary. Directed by James McTeague, written by the Wachowskis, cinematography by Adrian Biddle, music by Dario Marianelli, editing by Martin Walsh, starring Hugo Weaving as V, Natalie Portman as Evey Hammond, Stephen Rea as Chief Inspector Eric Finch, Stephen Fry as Gordon Dietrich, John Hurt as Adam Sutler, Tim Pigott-Smith as Peter Creedy, Rupert Graves as Detective Sergeant Dominic Stone, Roger Allam as Louis Prothero, Ben Miles as Roger Dascom, Sinead Cusack as Dr. Delia Surridge. Background for the movie: V for Vendetta was wide released on March 17, 2006. On a rough budget of $50 to $54 million, V made $134.7 million to finish number 41 at the worldwide box office for 2006. Critical reception was mixed at the time, with some lauding it and others outright decrying it. It was a very polarizing movie, apparently. Empire magazine named the film the 418th greatest movie of all time in 2008. Many critics of the film have held against the film in years since for its use of violence, vigilantism, and support of LGBT and non-Judeo-Christian beliefs. Come to think of it, I mean, wow. So surprising that there'd be critics of all of those things. V for Vendetta currently holds a 73% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 62 score on Metacritic, and a 3.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Now, I believe that you had said either last week or the week before that you have never seen this movie. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so this was your first time. Do you have any initial thoughts or impressions?
I really liked it.
I wondered if you might.
I thought it was well done. It was entertaining. There were flaws in it, I'm going to point that out. It's going to come out in my scoring, but overall, I enjoyed it.
I think there are a few things that make it stand out to me. It is certainly far from a perfect movie, but it is a very enjoyable movie for its length and for its subject material. It is obviously based on the comic book graphic novel by Alan Moore, who also wrote the Dark Knight Returns series in the late 80s. He's known for kind of his very gritty, heavy vigilantism, violent tendencies in comic book lore. But in this one specifically, I remember this movie coming out. I remember it being at least somewhat relevant. I think Guy Fawkes Day and November 5th and the rest of it at least translated to a non-English audience for the first time after this movie. Like, it got really widespread attention and kind of pierced through that public culture veil that sometimes surrounds it. There's stuff that like keeps out of the large popular culture sphere, and then there's stuff that slightly penetrates it. This is kind of the latter. But I remember watching this I'm pretty sure it was on our way to Europe that summer. I think that was the first time I watched it. I remember watching several different films during that trip, but I remember seeing this on the plane on the way over. And I don't know, I probably watched this a dozen times over the years. So over the 20 years that it's been out, it's fun to return to. I think it has a good flair for the dramatic. I think it lines up a lot with my own personal values, quite a lot, with the exception being taking the law into your own hands, the vigilantism and the violent aspect of the film, which I don't know if... let's get into that. Ostensibly, the movie is somewhat promoting violence and vigilantism as the appropriate means to fight fascism. I think at the heart of the movie, that's kind of what this is about. I think you have often stated or decried violence on this show. So is that one of the main criticisms that you had?
No. See, I would say that there's times when violence is necessary, and civil disobedience works best when there's actual elements of a just and lawful society where there is some element of the rule of law. But when there is no rule of law, what's left?
Well, boy, I guess I understand where you're coming from that. However, as we've discussed a lot in the last 15, 16 months, there's a lot to be said for peaceful civil disobedience and taking more of the Martin Luther King model or the Gandhi model as being peaceful resistance, doing things that necessarily provoke a response in your opponent, but not fighting back through violent means. Ultimately, in this, by announcing that he's going to blow up Parliament as a building, as a symbol of all that's wrong with the government, literally it would be the equivalent of blowing up Congress or the congressional building. But by announcing it in advance, you're ensuring that no one should theoretically be inside of it when it may or may not go off. And so that by itself is destruction, but is that necessarily violence? It is the attempt to try and root out a symbol, and so it has a bigger cause, a bigger production. But I don't know if that's necessarily the only way to fight against authoritarian rule and fascism. Just personally. I think there's enough means within even the strictures of this movie that they could have done something else. Now, that being said, the government had obviously waged a full-scale attack on all the different structures or all the different institutions from the top to the bottom, the police forces, the government intelligence, the media centers, all the rest of it, the same stuff that you'd normally expect out of an authoritarian government anymore. It looked very much like a Putin-esque government in that sense, but I still think that because you had a police force, you had judges, you had people that could be swayed quite easily, apparently, too. I think there could have been something to be said that you could fight back in a collective action type of scenario. And he did inspire a certain level of collective action. I just don't know if this is the way that I would be celebrating or promoting in the way that this movie does. That being said, still fun, still entertaining, and I thought it was... maybe I'm just getting too old again, but at 35, I tear up way too much for movies about anti-fascism anymore.
Okay.
I know. It's pretty sad. But I carry around with me a heavy air of defeatism at the hands of where we're currently at in the United States. So I guess that switches us into a slightly different topic. This movie is ostensibly about the UK, and the original story is written in response to Thatcherism. I've said many times on this show my disdain for Thatcher and Thatcherism.
Yes.
But I think where this readily applies is currently to the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you can draw a lot of parallels.
Yes. We're not nearly as far along as they were in this movie.
No, I don't think that they've taken over all of the different various institutions. But you could also see the use of a crisis. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not promoting this theory in any way, shape, or form, they did not intentionally cause a viral outbreak among their constituency or the general public, but they did manufacture dissent because of one in the name of safety, or I guess in freedom, whatever that means.
I don't know. I just find a lot of people that were bitching about masks bitch about how inappropriate some dress is. So, in other words, you can complain about nudity and say that you have to wear clothing. You just can't be required to wear it over your nose or mouth.
Well, the rationalization and the arguments there are hollow or thin most of the time.
I know.
But we're not arguing with rational actors.
No, you're not. So, I don't know what to say, which is why I just don't. I do what I can. I try to influence what I can, control what I can, accept what I can't within reason, and move forward.
I guess you said you enjoyed the film. What was the film about to you?
Well, the film to me was about the efforts that it takes sometimes to stand up to overwhelming odds. I mean, the fact is that at the end of the film, all the people who had died during the film, they're visualized, which means at least their thoughts or their ideas or their memories are being carried forward.
Sure.
So I think that's ultimately what it means, is that, that people have to stand up, and that people who end up sacrificing are not forgotten.
I think it takes a lot to inspire people to collective action. And sometimes you need a symbol of resistance, a lightning rod of action, more or less, and he became, or at least tried to become, that rallying or unifying force.
Yes, I think it's probably accurate. He became a symbol for, the symbol for the resistance.
So do you have a plot summary ready for us?
I do. Set in a grim future ruled by a harsh dictatorship, V for Vendetta follows a quiet young woman, Evey, played by Natalie Portman, who is rescued from the secret police by a mysterious masked rebel, V, played by Hugo Weaving. V launches a bold campaign of bombings and public messages meant to wake the public and inspire resistance against the regime led by Chancellor Adam Sutler. As Evey is drawn deeper into V's dangerous mission, she struggles with fear, freedom, and the cost of fighting tyranny. Meanwhile, a determined investigator, Chief Inspector Eric Finch, played by Stephen Rea, begins to uncover the truth behind the government's past crimes and V's personal quest for vengeance. Blending political thriller and action drama, the film explores themes of oppression, justice, and the power of ordinary people to challenge authoritarian rule.
Thank you, Dad. Did you know? The domino scene where V tips over black and red dominoes to form a giant letter V involved 22,000 dominoes. It took 4 professional domino assemblers 200 hours to set it up.
There are professional domino assemblers.
That is correct.
Boy, I wonder how you go about becoming a professional domino assembler. Is there a school for it?
I would doubt that there's a school. I think anytime you see those gigantic or ridiculous levels of domino setups, the ones that look like a Rube Goldberg machine on like TikTok, that's how you become a professional domino assembler. However, at this time, social media was not what it was now. I think this is the first year that like Facebook really took off. So, and about the point where YouTube was just starting to be a big thing. So I don't know. Be curious.
Okay.
Did you know? For the scene when V emerges from Larkhill, stunt double Chad Stahelski literally walked through fire, wearing just a special fire-resistant gel and a G-string. Stahelski's body temperature had to be lowered before the scene was shot, and luckily it was 3 degrees below zero the night of the shoot. 15 minutes before a take, he would put on ice-cold flame-resistant clothing, and once he took them off, he would be covered with fire-resistant gel which had been icing all day long. Now, Chad Stahelski has been on this program before. In what capacity?
I have no idea.
He is famous for directing the John Wick films.
Okay.
He went from stuntman to directing the John Wick films. And now I think he's doing some other action franchises. Something like that. I think I'd seen that he was going to do something else, but I can't remember what.
I would certainly want to make sure my G-string was properly flame retardant, because I wouldn't want roasted weenie.
Really? Some people pay double for that kind of action.
Yeah.
Did you know? The secret police are called the Fingermen, not for any unseemly reason, but because the new order was arranged on the model of the human body. The Chancellor was the head, the TV station BTN was the mouth, visual and audio surveillance were the eyes and ears, Inspector Finch was part of the nose, the police force, and Creedy's secret police were the hand, thus the Fingermen.
Which part was the rectum?
I would assume either the trash collectors or the plumbers.
Okay.
Did you know? The scenes in the abandoned London Underground station were filmed at Aldwych, a Piccadilly line station that closed in 1994. The branch still has tracks and electricity, meaning trains can still operate. So basically, it's got to be just available for if you need a train location with some level of power to it so that you can move a car a couple 100 feet back and forth. I would not be shocked if that was used in like Skyfall or something, since they have that big underground set piece in the trains area.
Any reason or given why it was closed?
No. My guess is a newer, more convenient station or something. Did you know? In the original graphic novel, V's cause was anarchy, not freedom. Alan Moore was very critical of the movie for changing what he called the anarchy versus fascism structure of his graphic novel into what he saw as an exploration of American neoliberalism versus American neoconservatism. That should have been set in the U.S. instead of Britain. Sorry, dude. Still entertaining. And finally, did you know, in all of Adam Sutler's scenes, he blinks only once? That's a high degree of concentration.
Yeah. And very good eye drops.
Could have done some product placement there for like Visine.
Yeah, well, I guess.
Anyway, that looks like a good spot for our first break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 304th episode, we discuss the heist classic Inside Man from 2006, celebrating its 20th anniversary. Directed by Spike Lee, written by Russell Gewertz, cinematography by Matthew Libatique, music by Terrence Blanchard, editing by Barry Alexander Brown, starring Denzel Washington, Clive Owen, Jodie Foster, Christopher Plummer, Willem Dafoe, and Chiwetel Ejiofor. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. All right, we left off at Best Performance. Dad, who did you have down?
I had Hugo Weaving.
I did too.
I just loved his performance. It's so hard to convey feelings with just a voice, but he seemed to manage.
They did a lot of little subtle gestures and movements, like the head movement, where it would tilt one way or the other, or something else to give it a little bit more expression and feeling. But I agree with you. His vocal gravitas carries a significant portion of the film, and he creates a very distinct identity just through the vocal work of this movie. Now, there were a few scenes that he ended up dubbing over for the original actor who was cast in this role and backed out after only a few weeks. But for the most part, he even did most of the stunt work, or at least was embodying the character as well. Obviously, like we mentioned, Chad Stahelski in the first segment here was one of the stunt people, so I don't know if he did like all of the knife work and all the action sequences, but even just some of the subtle body movements and the rest of it, he creates a very convincing character that, again, has that gravitas, but also has a wavering vulnerability to him, which I think is necessary to blend with the Natalie Portman character to give you that second element of the movie.
He did it in such a way that even though he was violent and vengeful, you still liked him. And that's not easy to do.
Well, I think that the movie crafts it in such a way that it's easy to root for him as the object opposite the totalitarian regime, just by its very nature. He's also very easily presented as the guy standing up for the woman, essentially, as she's attacked in the alleyway. That's our first introduction to the character, is he's saving the damsel in distress. So there are some easy things in just the presentation of the film and the overall writing that immediately make us root for him. But I think there's a vulnerability to the character that is imbued in his presentation. There's a lot going on in that sequence, and yet the trick of the movie is that you kind of use Evey's character as the audience avatar. And similarly, in that middle section where you think that you should be upset at him and feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you too, I think you still understand why he did it, for an ulterior or a greater purpose. That he wasn't doing it to be mean or regressive, but rather to try and bring something out in her that she didn't know she had. And likewise in us as an audience, to bring that out of us as well. Because the entire character is to promote us to action.
True. I guess I'm trying to figure out how I want to put this. He became, even though he was vocal, a quiet leader by his actions, if that makes any sense.
Well, he led more with action than he did necessarily with words. Yes, he does have the one speech from the TV station, but I think the effects of his specific actions ended up weighing more on overall how people took him as a figure or a symbol, and the call to action was greater than anything that he would necessarily say.
He had to start the momentum, though, because revolution never occurs in a country that's completely docile or controlled. Every place there's been a revolution has been where there's a taste of liberty or of freedom that ends up triggering the revolution itself. The United States had some level of self-rule. The Russian Revolution, they had a democracy after the Tsar was removed, or kind of a constitutional monarchy. Any one of those, you can see it. The intelligentsia, not the Islamic fundamentalists, overthrew the Shah of Iran. It was though they couldn't maintain force against the, I don't know how you want to put it, the junta or the group. And as a result, it's not until he starts reconveying and awakening them that they have the end scenes where all the people are coming to the square around Parliament and starting to resist.
Who is your best secondary performer?
Stephen Rea. I thought his performance was great. You could watch his evolution from bureaucrat to heartfelt endorser of the movement.
I think everybody in this has kind of a almost cliche role to how the movie works, which is why it's maybe not as clever as I think it would like you to believe. Evey's the audience avatar. Obviously, the Chancellor is just this face of evil, but he's only projected on a screen, kind of like the Emperor was in Star Wars for most of it. He only gets like full recognition once we get to the final part of episode 6. similarly, like Creedy has this kind of pragmatism to him, but he's corrupt and he's evil. Rea has this nobility to him. He's an investigator. He's to be trustworthy. He's not taking things at face value. He's questioning. He's serving a noble purpose, not necessarily as the audience avatar, but as maybe a change agent or a person that can be changed. That is, technically, he's a part of the party. He's not part of the resistance, but he does take steps to basically permit the revolution to happen all the way up through the ending, where he quite literally allows it to happen because he could have stopped it. And so I think he serves a very noble purpose in this film. You come to like him because you're ultimately, as a character, yes, he starts out on the wrong side, but there's this progression and a catharsis within him and within Evey. And as the two final characters really remaining in the train station in that last moment of the film, I think there's a symbolic awakening within both of them that the movie is supposed to entertain. I agreed with you. I also had Stephen Rea there for basically the same reasons. As far as most charismatic, though, I went back with Hugo Weaving, again, for a lot of the reasons that we highlighted before, because he's doing a lot of work in vocal and in small gestures to be the most appealing character in this entire film. But I have a feeling you're going to go with Stephen Fry.
That's exactly who I went with.
Wow, yeah. It's like we've done 300 plus episodes.
Well, he was likable. You know, I mean, you liked the character. He was affable. He was the embodiment of everything the fascist regime hated, which is a closeted homosexual who at least respected Islam.
Well, that's not why he had it, but
I know.
Appreciated art, appreciated expression, thought satire and different opinions were important to the model of a society. All right, let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here. I have the opening fight / Old Bailey, which is kind of that opening sequence. He saves her from the Fingermen, then they blow up the church.
Yes.
I think. Then
Old
I have
Bailey was the prison.
Okay. I'm not that familiar with London geography, so forgive me on that one. Jordan Tower, which is the sequence within the TV station. Then I have Lark Hill Revelations, which is kind of the diary of the nurse or the coroner that he ends up killing. I have Mock Prison / Valerie, which is kind of that middle section of the film where Evie's in prison and it's not exactly real, but also we have that cutaway to that sequence with Valerie that we are revealed later is an actual thing that happened. It wasn't part of this whole fake experiment process. And then obviously the final showdown between V and the rest of the heads of government.
Yes.
Did you have any others that you'd like to nominate here?
No.
Okay. So out of these, what is the best scene to you?
I had Lark Hill Revelations. I think it was by far the most revealing of the plot of the film and kind of was like a pivotal point. It also showed that not everything was what it seemed, and it kind of explained how each piece of the puzzle was put together.
I can appreciate a good exposition-heavy sequence because it reveals a lot of the story. And obviously, I've been on record saying that story and plot are very important to me. Character development is very important to me, getting behind certain movies. So I don't want to insinuate that it's not important, but I went with Mock Prison Valerie because to me, that's the emotional turn of the movie. You're kind of excited. You can be kind of rah-rah about the first portion of the movie, but until she goes through this ordeal and then sees obviously the I wouldn't say sacrifice, but the situation of the woman who died because of who she was, her identity and the rest of it, I think it just gives an additional weight or momentum to the rest of the film. And obviously with the trick essentially being played on Evey during the course of the film, I think that carries with it some emotional value too, because in the end, he is right that she's no longer afraid of the one thing that they may or may not have been able to take away from her. And if that's no longer a threat, she can act, which is what he was trying to give to everyone. Again, he is an inspiration, or his attempt is to inspire people to action. By removing the fear of the one last thing that they can take from you, you now have the ability to act without fear.
Yeah.
As far as my favorite scene, though, it's really hard not to really like the ending. The collective action, people coming together, a unity of sorts, the police standing down, him getting the comeuppance that he's seeking as far as a revenge. I mean, the whole thing is leading you to this moment. And by extension, I would say it's probably my most indelible moment as well, because I just remembered how the film ended. You know, how many different times that I've seen it. It's probably been about 5 or 6 years since I've seen it the last time. This is the number one thing that I really remembered.
For me, the favorite scene was Jordan Tower, simply because I just thought it was great to see how they were never quite sure who was who. And all these people, you know, with their masks or the ball stuffed in his mouth and his arms tied together. And ultimately, they grab the one guy and he doesn't prove to be him. And V ends up just rendering havoc and death and mayhem to the police. So I thought it was the most, even though it was the most violent, it was the most entertaining as far as action and almost the farcical nature of how he had the police moving. To me, it was just fun to watch.
And your most indelible moment?
Most indelible I had is the final showdown. I think that, to me, will be the one scene that I remember is, you know, and then the explosion or the destruction of Parliament.
Sure. Okay. Well, that takes us to our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 273 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Jennifer Runyon, 65. American actress. Another World. Ghostbusters. Charles in Charge. Corey Parker, 60. American actor. Biloxi Blues. Friday the 13th. A New Beginning. Will and Grace. Bob Rosenfarb, 74. American television producer and writer. Step by Step. Who's the Boss? Head of the Class. Stephen Hibbert, 68. American actor. Pulp Fiction. True Jackson, VP. And television writer. Late Night with David Letterman.
So I don't seemingly have much of a relationship with any of these people. I have a little bit of a relationship with some of their work, generally. Obviously, we've discussed Pulp Fiction on the show a few different times. We've discussed Ghostbusters on the show, but did you have anything that you'd like to say about any of these additionally?
No, not really. I somewhat remember Steve Hibbert being with David Letterman. I want to say he was with David Letterman as a writer back, I'm trying to remember if it was still in the NBC days. And he went over to CBS, or it was early in CBS years, but that's about it. I don't remember too many of the others. I had watched Charles in Charge, and I had seen Who's the Boss on a regular basis, but, you know.
All right. Nevertheless, we commemorate these for their contribution to the arts with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Let's make the awkward transition to best funniest lines. I will start. V. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
Evey. My father was a writer. You would have liked him. He used to say that artists use lies to tell the truth, while politicians use them to cover the truth up. V. A man after my own heart.
As a voiceover, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. But what of the man? I know his name was Guy Fawkes, and I know in 1605 he attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament. But who was he really? What was he like? We are told to remember the idea, not the man, because a man can fail. He can be caught. He can be killed and forgotten. But 400 years later, an idea can still change the world. I've witnessed firsthand the power of ideas. I've seen people kill in the name of them and die defending them. But you cannot kiss an idea, cannot touch it or hold it. Ideas do not bleed, they do not feel pain, they do not love. And it is not an idea that I miss, it is a man that made me remember the 5th of November, a man that I will never forget.
V. A building is a symbol, as is the act of destroying it. Symbols are given power by people. Alone, a symbol is meaningless, but with enough people, blowing up a building can change the world.
V. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak. I suspect even now orders are being shouted into telephones, and men with guns will soon be on their way. Why? Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power. Words offer the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth. And the truth is, there is something terribly wrong with this country, isn't there? Cruelty and injustice, intolerance and oppression. And where once you had the freedom to object, to think and speak as you saw fit, you now have censors and systems of surveillance coercing your conformity and soliciting your submission. How did this happen? Who's to blame? Well, certainly there are those more responsible than others, and they will be held accountable. But again, truth be told, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into a mirror. I know why you did it. I know you were afraid. Who wouldn't be? War, terror, disease. There are a myriad of problems which conspired to corrupt your reason and rob you of your common sense. Fear got the best of you, and in your panic you turned to the now High Chancellor Adam Sutler. He promised you order, he promised you peace, and all he demanded in return was your silent, obedient consent.
V. There are no coincidences, Delia. Only the illusion of coincidence.
Gordon Dietrich. You wear a mask for so long you forget who you were beneath it.
I've heard similar comments.
Context?
Been told similar things.
Okay. Well, we'll just start calling you the Gimp.
I guess.
Did you have any others?
Nope, I'm done.
I have one left. Finch. One thing is true of all governments. Their most reliable records are tax records.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to the Stanley Rubric. Legacy is up first. This is a measure of the legacy of the film roughly 5 years after it came out to today. So 2011 to today, what is the legacy of this film as shared between two equal yet separate groups? The industry and the audience, 5 and 5 points apiece between those two groups for a total of 10. Would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first.
Okay.
For the industry, I don't think it had a huge impact on it. I mean, there was no follow-up. It didn't become a franchise or anything. I don't know. There wasn't a whole string of these graphic novels turned into film. So it had mixed reviews. So I'm going to give it a middle score, 2.5 for the industry. For the public, I was surprised. Our informal office poll, about half of the people had seen it. You know, it's a 20-year-old film, so I got to give it kudos for that. It's apparently memorable and was at least popular, if not on an original release, but subsequently on probably DVD. And so I'm going to give it for the public a 3.5 because it does have some continued appeal.
So we're not terribly different. I'm just slightly higher than you are on both sections or both categories. I don't think I would agree with your statement that it did not inspire, but it is one of the last graphic novel or different comic book adaptations of this time and place. Theoretically put, we weren't quite yet into the comic book boom that we were about to get into a couple of years later once Iron Man and The Dark Knight hit. And obviously Marvel was coming. You were going to get the DC Extended Universe and all of these other things that were there. But you did have Spider-Man that was coming through the pipeline a couple of years prior. I think this was maybe the era of Spider-Man 3. It was about 2006, 2007, somewhere in that range. But before this movie in particular, you had, I think Watchmen came out maybe the same year, so don't quote me on that one. But you had like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you had Hellboy, you had some of these other graphic novels that had been made prior to it. So in essence, I wouldn't say that this is like inspiration for any of those, but it's probably on the back end of a fad, more or less. That being said, Alan Moore's adaptations, I think you could directly say that his version of The Dark Knight was a primary inspiration for Christopher Nolan and the Batman franchise. But then again, Batman Begins came out the year prior to this movie. So I think it's all working in concert. That it's not to say that the industry wasn't supportive of comic book films, but I don't know if a lot of them wanted to go down this road quite yet. I ultimately landed at a 3. I think that's probably fair. As far as the public, again, the fact that we had at least a good 6-7 people within our office sphere who knew the film, could name multiple people that starred in the film, knew roughly what it was about. I thought that was interesting for a film that I thought was more cultish. And to me, that's a bigger symbol of that it pierced the normal separation point between those that are like in the cult or understand the movie and have seen the fad and watched this repeatedly, and those that are in the general gist of pop culture. And so I put it at a 4 there, and so I have a 7. So it'd be a 6.5 between the two of us. All right, let's move to impact and significance. This is similar to the last category, but instead of 5 years after to today, we are relying on the first 5 years after this film came out, so roughly 2006 to 2011. What is the impact and significance of this movie as shared between the same two groups, the industry and the audience, 5 and 5 points apiece, for a total of 10. Since you led off the last category, I will take this one. Got no awards attention, was kind of in the middle, like it made money, but I don't think anybody was promoted on the back of this. It was somewhat of a starring vehicle for Natalie Portman, and I think it's tough to say because I think Star Wars probably is more influential for Natalie Portman's career than this is. But it's a string of movies where at least she was in successful movies leading up to ultimately her Oscar in 2010 for Black Swan. I think she's, after that point, taken a lot bigger swings at more artistic roles and really isn't doing franchise work. But you could say this is part of her earlier commercial aspect. That being said, Hugo Weaving, as much as he's popped up in a lot of different things, he's in The Matrix, he's in the Lord of the Rings movies, he's in the Marvel Universe a couple of years later when he's in the first Captain America movie. He's not an actor that the average person necessarily knows. It's kind of like one of those that's a character actor that you know if you're like deep into nerddom, because he stars in all of these really nerdy things. So with that, I really don't see that there were a ton of people that went on to do additional or extraordinary things. Like, I recognize some of the people that were like the British actors, such as the deputy inspector was on Sherlock with Cumberbatch and, I'm drawing a blank on Watson, the guy who plays Watson now.
Freeman.
Martin Freeman, thank you. But, you can only see so many English actors that haven't popped up if you watch basically any British television or stuff that's been produced by the BBC over a certain period of time. So I went with a 2 on the industry here. I won't belabor the point. As far as the audience, though, this is where it gets a little weird. I think it is a movie that grew out over time. Like, this is kind of in the sweet spot for people with, like, rentals and kind of finding or discovering movies after they leave theaters. It did produce a decent return on its investment. Obviously, it more than doubled its money, although you have to factor in, to a degree, the marketing and advertising budget in that. I don't know if that's part of the overall budget that's usually reported or not. But that being said, I think this movie was ultimately successful, even though it placed in the 40s in the worldwide box office of that given year. So because of that, I'm going to give it a 3 there. I have a 5.
Okay. I'm higher mostly, or for both categories.
Interesting.
For the industry, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this was Natalie Portman's first film after she stepped away to go to college.
That might be right.
And I thought she went to Oxford, which would be why she's in a film with all the British actors.
I thought she was at an Ivy League.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was something like Brown or Harvard or something. But
I don't know.
Anyway, but I think that kind of did get her back in to acting and such. And I think it did kind of help move along a few of their careers of some of these people into movies. So I went with a 2.5 for the industry. And really, I looked at the numbers for how much it generated and where it ranked. And then the DVD rentals or sales were pretty nice.
Which you've not stated where you get your credibility on that. You keep saying you pull out these numbers, but what is your source on this?
They had the numbers on Wikipedia, and they were quoted from, I believe it was Blockbuster.
Okay. All right.
Sales and rentals.
We'll at least credit it to Wikipedia, which I think for most people accept as a decent source of information, of gathering information. But okay.
Just don't cite it in a brief.
Well, naturally. You go to the root source from that. You take all of its links and go from there. But okay, fine. Anyway.
So I'm at a 4. So overall, I'm at a 6.5.
Well, we'll split the difference and average it out to a 5.75 between the two of us. Then we get to Novelty. Novelty is a measure of the originality of anything having to do with the movie and the execution on the movie, for a total of 5 points in each of those two divides in this category for a total of 10. I'll lead here because you usually take the next category first. I don't find this to be that original. Again, this is at the tail end of a lot of comic book movies that were graphic novels, were somewhat dystopian, were kind of made in a similar vein. The Wachowskis had done The Matrix, so even to a degree, this is less dystopian than even that is.
I know.
I just don't find anything like particularly original or unique. I think it's a well-executed movie, but it suffers in the originality. So I have a 1 for originality, and I have a 4 on execution. It's not a perfect movie, but I think there's enough here that makes it at least a very enjoyable movie.
Originality. I'm thinking of different films where vigilantism for higher purpose exists. You could even go with Hang 'em High with Clint Eastwood, where he's trying to get vengeance. You can go through The Searchers, which we did last week. Where
I think that's a little bit of a stretch.
I understand, but it's still vigilantism, right?
Yeah, okay.
So that in and of itself, all right? And it, even as a political thriller, it just didn't strike me as very original. So I'm at a 1.5 because the context of how it did it was fairly original by being within British and what took place and how, and 1984 this masked individual. I gave it a half point up from where I would have. So I'm at a 1.5. From execution, I thought there were several plot holes. I thought that the ending, I mean, as smart as these leaders are, how he played them was rather, I don't know, uninspiring. And they just kind of walked into his trap that somehow or another they didn't see the potential of this becoming turned around on them. Kind of struck me as being a bit odd. I mean, these people played the long play and seemed to be a higher of intelligence than anybody else to manipulate things. And then they didn't see this coming. 3.5. So I am at a 5.
Okay. So we average out to the 5.
Correct.
All right. That was a long walk to tread to have the same score, but okay. Whatever.
Would you like me to be shorter?
No,
I mean,
not necessarily.
I can offer less. I mean, that's what makes ultimately great podcasting. You can sit here and go, well, nothing.
Okay. Point taken. Classicness. This is a measure of how well the film has aged versus how well it is not aged over time. There are several distinct nuances to this category as to how it goes up or down. We actually treat the baseline of this not at a normal 5 as the median point, but rather a 6, because frankly, it's easier to take points off for things not aging well over time than it is to necessarily give points up. And so, as this category is full of gray area, we turn to our senior nuance correspondent, Dana.
Living within the gray area with the gray hair. So.
Sure.
All right.
At least you have the hair.
Yes. Starting with the 6, it's relevant now. It will be relevant probably in 20 years. I would like it not to be, but I have a feeling it will be, at least somewhere.
I think the relevance of the movie tends to be a lot heavier because it's one of the Western powers than it is necessarily just any random country. Like, I don't think just because it's dealing with a totalitarian society, it's quite as impactful if Russia's like the preeminent, or China is the preeminent authoritarian country that we know of. It's that you took Britain, or in our case, is currently going on in the United States, and so I think it's relevant now, but if we get through this period of the next few years yet without too much torn down, I think that's where the relevance comes from. And I would hope that 5 years from now, we can say that this isn't quite as relevant to, or does not feel as apparent in our daily lives as it did right now.
We'll have to see. We could end up with this kind of problem in Greenland, and then we'll have to act.
Sure.
Yeah.
Stands to reason.
Yeah. But I think it had some really interesting concepts of being pro-homosexuality, or not really pro-Islam, but bashing people who just hate Islam for no apparent reason other than they have a different thought or philosophy than, or religion than most of the rest of us. So I think it took a very good tone there, so I'm giving it points up for that as well. The fact that we did have kind of at least one of the heroes of the film being a woman was great. So I'm going to give it an 8 overall. I'm going to give it 2 points up for the combination of everything I did. And I really didn't have anything to distract from it as far as classicness, per se.
So I would give it 2 points up for its being ahead of its time and aging well on political chaos, political violence, using stuff that seems like it's mirroring at times. Obviously, the virus unleashed on its own people that has some weird harbingers in a post-COVID world. But I do take off a point from that for just, I think it is trying to promote a certain level of anarchy that's still undercurrent to this. You can say that it's neoliberalism versus neoconservatism. yes, some of that's true, but it is also using violence to justify an ends to a means, and I'm not sure that I'm perfectly okay with that. I think I'd rather it be civil disobedience in a peaceful manner because I think that can bring about greater change, but recognizing that for its one flaw, I have it at a 7. So that'd be a 7.5 average between the two of us. Moving to rewatchability, I'll let you start here because this is your first time with it.
Actually, I enjoyed it, and it's a film I would probably watch again. I may encourage others to watch it and watch it with them. So I may put it on every couple of years. To that extent, I'm going to go with a 6.5.
Okay.
It's not in my normal range of what I would automatically rewatch, but yeah, it's within that sphere. So anything above a 6 is definitely something I would rewatch, and it isn't quite to the 7 range where I'm going to regularly watch it, and 8 is where it's going to happen a lot.
I think the film is particularly good at establishing some choice set pieces, at least spaced out enough that it's not all action, but it gives you just enough to keep your attention rooted in the film. It's created somewhat with a modern audience in mind, one that has a lot of ADHD problems turning away from the TV. And I think the story is engaging enough. I think the movie does feel its length a little bit because it's over 2 hours. If this were maybe 15 minutes shorter, or you figured out some strategic ways to take a few things out here or there, I think I might be willing to even move it up a half a point, but I have that at a 7.5 because overall, I think the reason that people in our office had seen it is not just that it was an engaging movie at the time or it was somewhat of a pop cultural moment for the film, because, again, it finished 41st at the box office, and I think it's built steam over time. I think it's because it's an enjoyable film that people have been more willing to take a chance on it and enjoy it over time. So I have it at a 7.5, so that's going to move us to a 7 for rewatchability. Finally, we get to audience score on this one. We had an 87% for Google users and a 90% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.85. So to repeat the categories for this one, we had a 6.5 for legacy, a 5.75 for impact and significance, 5 for novelty, 7.5 for classicness, a 7 for rewatchability, and an 8.85 for audience score, giving us a final total of 40.6, and currently placing it on our list between two movies that we covered last year, Almost Famous and Ex Machina, for number 225 on the list. So not bad. That is our 274th different film on the list to this point.
Wow. How many of the original list that we came up with when we started this have we not covered?
A lot, actually, because we've covered a lot of stuff that wasn't on that list. Like,
I
this
know.
was not on that list.
Of course.
But, yeah.
I mean, when we came up with a list, did we ever think we would be here 6 years later?
I don't know. Hard to say.
Yeah.
Theoretically, if we had just followed the list, I think that would have covered 9 seasons. So, but we're doing about 50 episodes a year. That's a pretty good pace.
Maybe I'll be able to make it to 102 so that I can watch
St. Elmo's Fire.
St. Elmo's Fire with my pablum or my rice pudding with raisins.
All right. Remaining questions for this one. With the heads of government gone, where does the UK go next? How do they rebuild?
Interesting. I just saw a clip from a podcast, and I'm drawing a blank. He had been one of Obama's key political advisors when he first got into the presidency.
Okay.
Drawing a blank as to the name. Anyway, from Illinois. Anyway, he had commented that one thing that happened right now is that whether you like it or not, Trump has destroyed a lot of what the infrastructure of what the government was. So do you go about rebuilding or do you go about renewing? Since things are taken apart, do you just go back to what you institutionally had, or do you use this as an opportunity to completely rethink how you do things?
I would say that my tendency is towards the latter. I think the public, and it's still a democratic society, has basically told you we don't want the status quo. And continuing to favor the institutions to the detriment of your own voters just feels like you're not offering anything new. You're part of the problem. That isn't to be said that you can't put some of the correct strictures into law, separating the Justice Department and the Federal Reserve more specifically away from the presidential control, putting in more parameters, trying to overturn certain decisions that give the president some level of unlimited power. Those things you can put in, but I wouldn't make them central tenets of what you're expected to do. To me, the big thing of where, and I know this is not necessarily answering the remaining question because we're trying to apply it to this movie in specific, but my biggest issue with where we're at right now is Article 1 of the Constitution is Congress. It was always meant that Congress was going to be the most important branch and have the most authority and singular power. And we've slowly ceded the ground where Congress, in order to remain in elected office and not have to do anything politically damaging, because they have to answer to the voters seemingly much more often than either the court system or the president, they have ceded all of their authority and all of their power to those two institutions. And so until you're going to have a healthy Congress, which right now that just takes a lot of collective action from two political parties that are not currently healthy. I don't think it's too far to say that the Democratic Party is not a healthy institution at this point because they're not willing to take some of the actions that they probably need to do. Case in point that there are people right now still debating on whether or not they're going to vote for additional funding to this Iranian war, which I think would be a catastrophic mistake on their part. But you need two political parties that are willing to actually legislate and put their chin out and say we're for something by trying to put it into law. And right now, neither party is really willing to do that. They just accede to whichever presidents got the authority and the power at that one time, or they're there to oppose who else is in office. That's their only role. And until you get a functioning, healthy third branch that tries to take back and start competing again on that level, I don't think you're going to fix this country.
Well, there's a few things that can happen right off the bat that would go a long way for this country. One of which is
eliminating the filibuster.
Well, no. I'm not even going there. I'm going to start with this, which is a constitutional amendment that says that all federal employees must retire by the age of 75 and cannot run for election if their term would end or would exceed the age of 75. Because
it's pretty sad that you would think that you needed a constitutional amendment for that. I can think of a lot of other things that would be better constitutional amendments that would make more sense.
I understand.
How about popularly electing the president?
That's the second one. But I think you need to start with the one that I think most people will agree with, which is that we need to limit, because we get too many people. I mean, right now, Mitch McConnell can barely speak. Who's running his office? Who's voting? It's not Mitch McConnell. So, that's what we're talking about. And there's comments all the time about the health of the president. We had questions about the competency or cognitive functioning of Joe Biden. I mean,
I get where you're going, but again, is this something that you really need the level of a constitutional amendment to curb? This should be answered by the voters.
Sure.
Because yes. Or B, it should be handled more internally by the party machines, which are not functioning actors right now either.
Correct. It hasn't been, and it hasn't been for a long time because, quite frankly, I would love to see us go away from these beauty contests, which is the primary voting, because they're useless. You know, I hate them. I think that they just end up becoming that. It's why you have the endorsements of the president can make all the difference in the world. Blah blah blah.
No.
Creates problems.
No. The president's endorsement wouldn't have helped in a Democratic primary. It's only in attracting the far right voters of the current administration that's going to be necessary. And again, unless you're going to talk about congressional seats, I just don't see that primaries in a random state X is going to make that much of a difference. And definitely for president, you need primaries because you have to have people go on stage and argue for what the future of the country should look like. That's what's supposed to happen.
Well, when we're starting to get to restructuring, the first thing is it should not be that people have to make a choice between eating and going to the doctor.
Yeah, that's fair.
One. Number two, it should not be a choice between trying to have family, friends, leaving the children home alone, as opposed to having some sort of affordable daycare so that mothers and fathers can actually work to earn a living and not have all of their money just eaten up trying to take care of their children, so that, you know, we're having a declining population because of that.
Yeah, you're having multiple different things. I mean, if anything, what is symbolizing is that if they can, and I use the term they, meaning specifically because now I'm in my Democratic/liberal hat, if they can use their unlimited access and powers to break down the walls so that they can do much more authoritarian stuff like what Homeland Security and ICE most specifically is doing, or start any number of their foreign regime change wars, etc., we can certainly do that with domestic policy, which has always been at the forefront of what we want to do. It's given us the opportunity to make bold choices and not be afraid that people are not going to see what we want them to see in it. Yes, you're always going to get the pushback from certain outlets like Fox News or any of the talking conservative podcast group. You were never going to convince them anyway. But I think if you try and do a apparatus that is much more media savvy, much more media centric, trying to get out your message, trying to be persuasive of why certain things in this country are needed, I think you can do a lot of big, bold things through legislation to get stuff passed. You will need to remove the filibuster. Just pure and simple. You're not going to be able to get a 60-vote supermajority from one political party or the other to do anything. And so that's like the one remaining barrier to try and do it. But people are not going to respect that one party is just going to be able to, in the minority, an entrenched minority rule, be able to hold up all of the change that they want to see. Regardless of whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, I think the filibuster is just further entrenching the disgust with Congress that people have.
Part of the problem is that up until about the 1980s, you had a liberal wing and a conservative wing of both parties. That's no longer the case. The Republicans are the conservative party, the Democrats are the liberal party. And that's one of the reasons why our politics is so polarizing. Because it used to be if you were a Republican, you were rallied behind the candidate, whether he was a conservative. Maybe the liberal wing would be able to moderate some things in the agenda, and if you were a liberal Democrat, the conservative wing would tend to moderate a little bit of your agenda. You don't have that anymore. So now it's just black and white. That's it. And that's where part of the problem comes in. I mean, do you really think Dwight Eisenhower could run as a Republican now?
No, but neither could Richard Nixon.
No.
He promoted way too many expanded social programs and federal agencies to run as a current conservative Republican. The modern conservative Republican Party starts with Ronald Reagan and has been reformatted now with MAGA.
Yeah.
So this has been Political Hour with Tom and Dana.
Yeah. So that's fine. Anyway, but as far as where they go from there, rebuilding, I guess the question is ultimately, is it rebuilding or remodeling? How do you want to proceed? Where do you want to go with the country?
You have taken out all of the major heads of state. You have the bones of a previous government regime, while at one time mired in a democratic society, it had become authoritarian. And do you want that system and that structure to still remain where it could be susceptible to further authoritarian creep? Or do you try and rip out some of the stuff that was bad institutions and try and completely restart? I'm of two minds. I think you could use the German model, but then again, because this is a revolutionary moment within its country, as opposed to liberation from an outside force, as the Germans were by us during World War II, they removed a lot of the need for the German military during that point in time. And frankly, there were also multiple occupied zones, and the country was split in two for decades. And it only came back together 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so because of that,
yes.
I don't know if you can necessarily, like, is the United States in the version or the universe of this movie going to come in and help support and try and rebuild the government without the structures of the military and the authoritarian regime? I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. So if you're relying purely on yourself, and we've only seen characters from within the bubble of this country, you probably have to rely on some institutions because you can't have complete anarchy. I don't think anybody was looking for that. But you're going to have to elect new leadership, and I don't know how you'd go about that.
Yeah.
All right. Second remaining question. Did V pick Evey for something, or was it just pure coincidence?
There's a reason why his comment is about there are no coincidences, Dila. Only the illusion of coincidence.
So it's Delia, one.
Delia, excuse me. So, yeah.
Okay, I don't know what the story is behind the graphic novel, but I have to assume that he chose her for something. I don't know if he was meaning for it to go as far as it did, but
yeah,
I think she's right. Given the background that she had of losing all of her family, she would be the perfect patsy of involvement. And then, obviously, that she's a member of the TV station, so he's got to use her as an infiltration method. So, yeah, I would probably side to she was picked, but I think there are some things that he didn't plan on that were a further portion of this. So, any remaining questions for you?
Nope.
All right. So, remaining thoughts for the week.
This episode will drop after the Oscars.
Correct. And after our live
post-off, yeah.
Yes, after our live show that happened on Monday.
But I am looking forward to them, even though the informal office poll, not one person could, other than your mother, who I forced to watch several of them, name any of the films that were nominated this year.
I mean, let's be honest. You and I have always been the outliers when it comes to like film recognition and appreciation. The Oscars is like a second Super Bowl for us. And for the rest of the general public, they couldn't care less anymore. It's just not, it does not hold the same sway or attention moment that it used to.
No, it doesn't. And, I mean, yeah, they could care less, which is probably why it's going off network television.
Let me ask this, and this is always kind of the weird piece after a large project. We invest so much time as podcasters into the lead up to the Oscars and award season. That basically starts and runs from September through the Oscars and usually March. So theoretically, it's actually a longer award season than an awards off season. But now that you've finished up, because we did our live episode a couple of days ago for our preview, you don't have to watch anything anymore outside of what you need to do for the show. And we have some kind of popcorny, more enjoyable films coming up in the next few weeks. You have not seen Inside Man, correct?
No.
Okay. It was a film originally slated for Ron Howard that he stepped out of, and then Spike Lee stepped in at the last minute to direct Denzel, and it's a heist film. So I have a feeling you'll enjoy it. But that's the kind of movie that we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. There aren't any of these like heavy films that we got to watch. There's no Hamnets in the near future. You don't have to watch 15 shorts in like a week span. You don't have to watch a bunch of heavy documentaries. What are you planning to do with the extra time now that you've finished another year of a big project?
First off, I have several books that I want to get to that I have sitting on my shelves and need to. Second thing is I am going to go forward with two projects. One is I am going to go forward with my own YouTube weekly show where it's going to be basically me talking about law and what my history is, some of my war stories, talking about, and this is where you had commented, I'm going to watch The Lincoln Lawyer for this season, and I'm going to start critiquing it from a
you kind of already missed the moment. You got to watch something that's topical at this point. That already came out like 6 weeks ago.
I understand, but I'm still going to comment about it, and I'll clip it up and put it out on YouTube and, on TikTok and Instagram and such. And there will be a few other shows that I'll probably do the same thing with, and that'll be part of it. And it'll be a chance for me to just talk about stuff, and so I'm going to figure it's going to be a live show, so I don't have to edit or anything, and I'll just whatever it is, it is. So I'm planning on doing some of that starting sometime this summer and carrying it into the fall, and then I have a lot of work to do in the next several months.
Fair enough.
I mean, I've got a lot of work for what I want to do for the podcast and for the show and for the plans that I have for the fall yet that I'm still going to be working on. So I got a lot on my plate. So I won't be at a loss for things I need to do.
I am trying to focus on starting a new venture similar to yours, although yours is more of a mini series kind of episodes, TikTok videos, shorts kind of thing. Mine is a little bit slightly longer format, but more centric on TV, which I'm hoping that it already has come out so people know what I'm talking about by the end of this weekend. The problem is I'm still relying on my counterpart to accept one of the 2,500 suggestions I've given for a name of the frickin' show. Because I need to start building the branding and all the other stuff around it yet. But yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Eventually, I will finish the book that I started over Christmas break. I'm reading a physical book for once. I took it with me last night because there was a gap in between having dinner with my cousin and then doing my small group discussion. We were discussing all the Best Picture nominees, so I was there like an hour early, so I got through about 50 pages. Not bad.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I'm going to have some time to either catch up on some additional TV series that I hadn't gotten to, or maybe some other things, a couple of movies that were on the Cinema Legacy poll list that I hadn't seen yet, maybe. So I'm glad for the opportunity for some flexible space, but I'm also sad that I don't have maybe some of the planned rigidity of my schedule where it's like I know what I have to watch and so I'm kind of spurred into stuff. Because sometimes when you have too much freedom and flexibility, it's like scrolling on the Netflix page and hoping that something inspires you to watch it. But anyway, I think that's a good place for this week. Thank you for listening. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. Next week, for our 304th episode, we discuss the heist classic Inside Man from 2006, celebrating its 20th anniversary. Directed by Spike Lee, written by Russell Gewertz, cinematography by Matthew Libatique, music by Terrence Blanchard, editing by Barry Alexander Brown, starring Denzel Washington, Clive Owen, Jodie Foster, Christopher Plummer, Willem Dafoe, and Chiwetel Ejiofor. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GmailPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and read by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.